SOMA! Oh, I'm dizzy. So anyone who's been on my channel for more than 2 seconds, you'll know that this is just something I have to talk about because it's all that's been on my mind the past few days. Oh my god. Now, to start with, I'm going to try to talk about SOMA generally without spoilers. Just a general overview kind of thing, what I basically thought of it overall, and then go into spoilers later in the video. I will make it abundantly clear when that point comes. So if you haven't watched a full Let's Play, for instance, or played it yourself through to the end, anything like that, then that'll be the point of no return, and when you should probably turn this video off. If not right now, if you don't want to hear anything. This is something I definitely have to talk about, especially since it's made by Frictional Games, my all-time favorite video game developer, which is a big thing to say for me, because I usually don't tend to pick favorites on a lot of things, because my interests are so varied, and I like different things on different days. I get into certain moods with the things that I like, but with Frictional, everything they seem to put out so far I have absolutely loved. Even when I get into other fandoms or other games, anything else that I like, if they make something else or they talk about other things that they're going to be working on, I immediately fall right back to where I was back in about 2011 when I was just starting to get at Amnesia, and I said, you know what, this is just a phase, it won't last, I'll just ride it out and see where it goes from there. And I'm still here. What I especially love about them is that they combine everything I like into their games, pretty much. They combine survival horror, incredible storytelling, amazing characters, complex dilemmas and issues. All their characters are very human, essentially, and they all have very good and very bad points about them, which makes it interesting to see who identifies with who is on this character side, is on that character side, or whatever. But the idea is, with Frictional Games, is that Frictional often tries to play the angle of, it's all based on perspective, really, what the right or the wrong thing to do is. It seems black and white at first, or so easy to choose, because often times we're used to games that have just like, oh, there's the evil option, there's the good option, but with Frictional, it's sort of like, this is the scenario, a lot of messed up things going on, but these are really, really trying circumstances. What would you have done? And you're sitting there like, I don't know if I would have done it any differently, or maybe I would have done it differently. It's really hard to say. And the interesting thing is, the past few games have on some level sort of addressed this sort of very human quality, sort of like the darker side of humanity. Here, Frictional is literally tackling the concept of humanity. Humanity itself. What makes it possible? And what we define as being human. And that's really interesting. There's a lot of moral dilemmas throughout SOMA as you go through it. A lot of hard decisions you have to make. But ultimately, it weighs on your conscience about what exactly you should do at certain points when you have the option to do so, and how you feel about basically what you've had to do to get up to that point. And a lot of people might complain the fact that this doesn't really change the ending. Again, this is not a spoiler or anything like that. This is just, for those who've played Frictional Games, you know that the ending usually is a set ending, or in the Dark Descent's case, you just choose which ending you want based on what you do at the very final scene. I like that because it hits more, because then it's up to your conscience to decide whether or not you're happy with the choices you've made. And you're satisfied with how it ends up, given what you've done to get to that point. It's on your shoulders. How are you going to live with what you've done? That's on you now. Now, of course, people are going to ask, so is it better than Amnesia? Is it better than Penumbra? What do you think? What do you think? And I'm going to give the unpopular response of, it's not fair to compare them, because, well, especially with Amnesia, because Amnesia and SOMA are in totally different time periods. They're in totally different locations. and very different scenarios. So it's really difficult to kind of compare them. Like, you can compare, the Amnesia games amongst each other because they're in the same franchise. You can compare the Penumbra games against each other because they're in the same franchise. I mean, you could compare Penumbra and Amnesia a little bit, but that's because the structure, or at least the gameplay, was so similar. SOMA does have some kind of similar gameplay, for the most part, I would say, with a few additions and subtractions here and there. But overall, it's pretty much similar. In terms of, like, is it better? That's sort of subjective. That's based on what you like. So, for me, I would say Amnesia is still my all-time favorite, but SOMA is really close. I think I like it better than Penumbra, which is saying something, because I really do enjoy Penumbra. I think it needs more love, for sure. You see a lot of Frictional's older work, and yet some of the new ideas they've adopted into SOMA. You can definitely tell that Frictional is more so trying to get you to focus on the story. And I see a lot of people who are complaining about the same gameplay as before, or simplistic stuff like that, and I'm like, that's not the focus here. I mean, I've always gotten the impression that Frictional has always been about the story, and always trying to get you to think. That's what I love about these games. It's just like a combine of everything I like in storytelling, and that it's survival horror, but also they're trying to make you think about these things. Even when you turn the game off and you're walking around out in the world, that you're still thinking about it, and you're still wondering what your whole opinion is about everything that you've just seen and what you would do in that same situation. I would say this is also probably, I know this is going off topic slightly, but I think this is also why Frictional chose the Chinese room to collaborate with to make the last Amnesia game while they were working on SOMA. Because it's interesting to me, because it's like, almost watching this at some points made me feel like Frictional was almost trying to replicate some things that the Chinese room did in terms of at least storytelling. Because in Amnesia, at least the Dark Descent and Penumbra, the ways of storytelling and getting it across were definitely creative, awesome, and effective, but were also in some respects pretty simplistic. With Machine for Pigs, things got a little bit more elaborate in terms of also not only like the character reacting to things, or basically the view or certain cinemas, especially the ending. Everyone talks about Machine for Pigs ending. That's like the most iconic part of the game. And I feel like that's sort of what Frictional was aiming for here. Maybe at least a little bit. That's what it felt like to me. And now, I know what you guys are thinking. You're like, Zera, you're a total Machine for Pigs nerd. Obviously, you're going to try to compare SOMA to a Machine for Pigs, obviously, because you love it so much. And I'm not the only one who's made comparisons between these two. Not even just in terms of how the story is told, or the story-driven focus here. Because I would definitely say that SOMA and Machine for Pigs, out of all that Frictional has had a hand in, are probably the two more story-driven games. But somebody actually posted a video already putting the machine speech from Machine for Pigs at the very last scene you see in SOMA. And it actually makes you think of the comparable things between the two games, and there actually are quite a few. So it's not just me, it's not just the fact that I love Machine for Pigs so much. There actually are a lot of similarities between the two, which I could possibly go into later when I get to spoilers. But at least I'm not the only one who thought of this connection, and I can only hope that others will see it too. Alright, it is time now to move on to spoilers. Do not proceed beyond this point if you have not finished playing or watching SOMA. It's hard to know where to begin in terms of the spoilers, but let me see if I can find a starting point. We get explained in SOMA that the WoW is the artificial intelligence in Pathos 2, that once the comet that hit Earth and pretty much caused the apocalypse, and what we presume to be everyone on the surface dying, though we don't know for sure. I mean, some people could have survived, but again, we don't know for sure. That's all we can assume. But once this happens, this AI, the WoW, does whatever it can to preserve humanity. That's like its new purpose. The WoW is one of those things that has good intentions. Preserve humanity in any way that it can. That's a noble cause. That's totally great. It's great that it's doing everything it can to compensate for this catastrophic event. But what it's doing in the process is putting this will, this need of doing this, or whatever it needs to accomplish this goal, above the lives of the actual humans that are there. And that's what I also found interesting when you find Amy. She says, you know, it won't let anyone die. No one is allowed to die. Which is interesting coming from a robot that exploded off all the heads of everyone at Omicron. That's pretty fucked up. And I know it's because it was to preserve itself. And because, what was his name? Ross was trying to kill it. Because he saw that WoW was going totally amok. It was affecting the wildlife, the sea life outside Pathos 2. And for some reason, I mean, that's not fully explained. For some reason, when things get input with enough structure gel, they become a lot more aggressive. It's never fully explained why. I'm not sure why, but all I know is that apparently if you use a lot of the structure gel, also you start to become like an addict to it, and you constantly need a fix. And presumably that's what a lot of the monsters are all about. Now, obviously there's the question of, you know, are these robots that have the brain scans in them, like Simon, like Catherine, Carl, any of the other such characters you meet, are they actually human and stuff like that? The only thing is that they're all isolated. Whether they're the humans being kept alive by the WoW, and whether that's with, you know, trying to use machine parts in them, or using the structure gel, or creating an outside set of organs for them, whatever it is, even for the machines that have the personalities inside them, they've all been on their own. And they've been unable to move towards each other. I mean, if they were all a close-knit community of, like, the robots or the people on life support together, then at least I could understand that. But they're all alone. I know, again, the WoW is trying to do its best to save everyone. But at this point, I realized that it did more harm than good, in the name of good. And even though I didn't really like Ross and didn't really trust him, especially the way he was acting towards the end of the game, especially since he was going to kill Simon, even before he died, I still agree with the idea of destroying the WoW. When you get to the point, the thing you're trying to keep alive, humans, ends up being your primary target for destruction, that's fucked up. Like with the machines turning on Carl and stuff, I can only assume that's, again, was the WoW's fault. It's just like, what the fuck? What the fuck? And there's also that red substance all over the walls. I'm not exactly sure what that was about, because the WoW definitely looked different than those red shadow-looking globs along the walls. Call it the shadow because it doesn't look like it. Some people have come up with the explanation that it's basically the result of the comet. I'm not so sure. If anyone has a good explanation for what that stuff is, how it got there, and why everyone's ingrained in it, killing everyone, it seems like it's killed people, but I could be wrong. Definitely let me know. I'm actually kind of curious for that. I know people have argued that the WoW is benevolent, and I agree that its motives certainly are, and it's probably doing this out of some kind of benevolence, but it's terribly, terribly misguided. Think of this. It's an AI that wants to save humanity from the apocalypse, but it goes to extreme measures, questionable measures, to do this, even creating new, different kinds of bodies for them. Does that sound familiar? And that's why I think there's an easy connection that can be made from Machine for Pigs to SOMA. Though there is slight difference between the two, where Machine for Pigs sort of explores the darker sides of humanity, like they're all pigs, they're all horrible, that's what they deserve to be, even though Oswald was trying to save them. In SOMA, it's more like whatever body you're in, you're still human. Everything else there, why can't we call you human too? The monster designs in this game are actually really creepy. Looking at least especially the Gatherers, after playing The Dark Descent, you can definitely see why the game tries to encourage you not to look at them, because they are pretty goofy looking, especially when you take them outside of the game and look at them on their own. Like, in the context of the game, they're pretty creepy. But when you take them out, they look kind of silly, and you're just like, oh, I'm scared of this silly little flap, long-jawed thing. And maybe the case could apply to the pigs too, though, but in the man-pig's case, you're supposed to kind of feel bad about the fact that you were scared of them in the first half of the game when you see them in the cages, acting like children, playing with toys and stuff. The suitors, I will admit, are still pretty freaky and creepy looking, especially since they are human entirely. They've just been tortured. So, yeah, that is pretty unsettling. The Trinket, I would say, are half and half. Like, they're half goofy, they're half intimidating. In Soma, the monsters are really, they're asymmetrical. They're unnatural looking. It's like they're trying to be human, so hard to be human, but they're not quite there yet. When you take them even outside of the game, they are still pretty darn creepy to look at, and I would be freaked out seeing one at the end of my bed. Also, the way they speak things, they have the heavy kind of wheezing breaths like the suitors have. There's also some times where the monsters make weird glitchy kind of sounds, or weird fragments of words or sentences that kind of are also unsettling. It's just like they're trying to speak almost like they were human, but they don't fully grasp language yet. And the death screen is also really creepy with people with tar covering their faces, which I can only imagine is the structure gel. It looks like tar, but it's probably the structure gel from the WoW. I really enjoy Simon as a protagonist, and at the ending especially, I can kind of level with both Catherine and Simon, because he's entirely new to this, and Catherine being used to all this, and she's like, I'm tired of explaining it to you over and over, I can't be responsible for your ignorance. And at the same time, you're like, but at the same time, it's understandable why he reacts that way, and it's also understandable why she reacts that way. But with something that really hit me, I think, was towards the last third of the game, when you're getting Simon switched over into the new suit in order to go down to the abyss. And I think the game tries to pull, it tries to fool you with the idea that your consciousness shifted from the original body that the Simon bot was in to the new one. Because the screen changes from that one seat to the new one, and you're like, oh, okay, I switched over. But then he says, then when you're switched over to the new body, you hear the old one say a sentence, and you're like, what the heck happened? Why is he talking? And I got a sinking feeling and thinking, something is up that Catherine didn't tell us about. And she says it's basically a coin toss between whether or not you get switched over. Honestly, I think this is her way of trying to get Simon calmed down and to go along with the plan, because I don't think this exists. I think here the game is actually, Simon gets his brain copied, and then he goes to sleep, and then we're playing as what people call Simon 3, because Simon 1 is the actual man who died 100 years ago. Simon 2 is who we play as through most of Soma, and Simon 3 is who we are during the last Abyss section of the game. The game tries to fake you out with this, to think that the consciousness shifted over, but instead you're playing as the copy of the second one. You're playing the copy of Simon 2. You're Simon 3 now. And who you were just playing as has gone to sleep. And you don't realize this because, again, the game switches screens over, and you're still Simon. You still have the memories you had when you were Simon 2 or whatever. There's a moral dilemma you get to have before you go down into the abyss, and that's if you want to drain the battery pack from the Simon bot, effectively killing him, you could let him wake up, but then he would be totally alone. And the Let's Player I watched chose to shut him down, and I would agree with that. being utterly, completely alone is horrifying and so depressing, and the way that that's the way one of the Simons ends up at the end, in the abyss, when they have Catherine and Simon's brain scanned for another time to be put on the Ark and sent off, and he realizes, we're still here. What happened? And then he says, screaming that, Catherine, you lied, we said we'd be up there. And she's saying, our copies are up there, you don't get it. She describes it as, we lost the coin toss. I don't think that's what happened. I again think that that's what she's trying to explain to try and calm him down. Because ultimately, this is how it's been. Your brain scan was copied. It can't actually be cut and paste. It can't actually be transferred. Your consciousness can't be transferred over. You can only be copied there. And it seems like when you get to the epilogue, and someone's like, whoa, did it work? I made it. See, in his story, he made it. To the copy, it seems like it was a seamless transition. That was, if we went right to the epilogue after that, but that's what we would have thought it would have been like the same as the fake out from Omicron. But the game now shows you, with the ending, by having it leave on Simon 3, that it's not a transfer. It's a copy. And whether or not you believe this copy to be still you, to be still human, is up for debate. Simon certainly doesn't seem to think so. He's like, that's not us, it's not us. But the one that's up there certainly seems to think it is him, acts just like him, looks like him, it's back to his human appearance. And it's horrifying because then, for Simon 3, after launching the Ark, all the power goes dead. And in the middle of the argument he's having with Catherine about this, because he still doesn't understand this, she goes silent. Screen goes blank. He has no one left to talk to down there. And he just says, don't leave me alone. And that's the way his story ends. And it's horrifying and sad and depressing and just awful. And I find a lot of good horror games seem to focus on this, on the idea of being completely, utterly, inescapably alone. And I think that's what was the sad thing, and the thing that really determined what I would have done if I played this game myself, with all the other people you come across. There are a lot of choices whether or not you can kill somebody or keep them alive, or I think that's with the choices with like Amy, Carl, and the Simon too. I would choose to kill them all off. Not because I hate them or I don't think that they deserve to live, but because what they have is not living. They deserve better than that, and they shouldn't suffer down at the bottom of the ocean alone for eternity. That's almost worse than death. Actually, that is worse than death. I think it's you thinking about some really serious stuff, and it starts to really play with your mind a bit to think about the idea of there being other yous and what you would do coming across these machines acting like humans. And even though the ending is really, really depressing, and to be honest, the very sweet epilogue almost makes the sad ending even worse for me, because it just knowing that this one Simon and Catherine is happy while the other two are gonna freaking die or something, it's horrible. It's heartbreaking. And you realize that you're having a feeling, these emotions over brain scans in robots. And I like, again, the fact that there seems to be no one right answer to this. That Friction leaves it open, whether or not you consider the brain scans in robots to be human, whether you consider the WoW to be in the right or in the wrong, whether you consider it a good idea to kill the people you have the chance to or leave them alive. It really weighs on you. In Amnesia, for instance, it's all about what your character's past life, or before they lost their memories, has done already. There are bad things they've done already, and just righting their wrongs, which is straightforward enough. In some respects, it just is mostly trying to find out what they did and then what they have to redeem themselves of. Yet with SOMA, it's just launch the Ark into space, and that's it. It's just the choices you make along the way contribute to how you feel by the end of the game. And seeing what everyone in Pathos 2 went through, Now this is sort of off topic, but one last thing I kind of want to send off with here. It's interesting because after the Chinese room made Machine for Pigs, the two developers then went their separate ways, and they both released new games this year. The same year, both developers released separate games, and what's interesting to me is that they're both about the apocalypse. With the Chinese room, it's very beautiful landscapes about a rapture sort of apocalypse, where it's tragic, but yet it's beautiful. SOMA has tragedy, but is not what I would consider beautiful. It is gritty, it is harsh, it is heartbreaking. And not that there aren't parts in, everyone's gone to the rapture that aren't heartbreaking, but SOMA sort of kind of drains your emotions out in a way that seems unexplainable. SOMA has made me feel in a way that I've never been able to really pinpoint. I guess I could say drained or depressed or confused or just out of sorts. None of the words I even said kind of accurately describe what I felt watching this game and how I felt afterwards. You feel, maybe it's hollow or fake. You feel yourself as if you're not exactly right. Then you wonder yourself about your own existence and being human, I guess. I guess that's the only way I can actually describe it. If you like frictional games work at all, do yourself a favor and watch and or play this game. You won't regret it. I'm so glad that Frictional has brought their A game, and they brought it all this time. So that's about all I have to say. It's something to be experienced, and I hope this was helpful or at least interesting for you to watch. And that's my thoughts on SOMA, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.